The moment they started laughing, I knew the Colonel wouldn't just stand there, but I didn't expect what he'd reveal next. Welcome to my channel Midsummer Myths, where you find stories like no other, packed with twists, drama, and unbelievable moments you won't forget. Today's story begins in a small-town coffee shop, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names, or at least thinks they do. It was a chilly Saturday morning, steam rising from mugs, and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls filling the air. Emily, a young woman in her 20s, sat at the counter with her sleeves rolled up. On her forearm was a detailed tattoo, an eagle clutching a globe, an anchor, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. The lines were bold, the shading meticulous, the kind of tattoo that wasn't just ink, but a story. Two men sitting in the corner noticed it. They didn't see the meaning, they saw something to mock. One whispered to the other, then both laughed, loud enough for Emily to hear. "Nice sticker, sweetheart," one called out, smirking. "What, your boyfriend, a jarhead or something?" Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't flinch, but you could see her eyes cloud over. She took a sip of her coffee and kept her gaze forward, but that only egged them on. They made another comment, something about wannabe Marines and attention seekers. Their laughter was sharp, invasive. What they didn't know was that at a corner table near the back sat a tall man in a pressed black jacket, his posture straight as a rifle barrel. He'd been quietly sipping his black coffee, but his eyes had been on Emily since the first insult. Colonel James Porter, retired Marine, combat veteran, and the kind of man whose silence could speak louder than most people's shouting, stood up. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. He walked slowly toward the counter, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. The two men saw him coming, and you could see the shift in their faces, that fleeting moment where arrogance meets uncertainty. The Colonel reached Emily, set a hand gently on her shoulder, and looked at the men. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Do you think that tattoo is a joke?" One of them shrugged. "Just saying, not many little girls walk around with marine ink." Without another word, Porter slid his jacket off and draped it over the back of a chair. Beneath it was a tight, olive green shirt, the kind worn under dress uniforms. On his left arm, a sleeve of service tattoos, dates, coordinates, and names. On his right forearm, in bold black ink, the exact same eagle, globe, and anchor as Emily's, only faded from years of sun and service. He didn't raise his voice. She earned hers. The men blinked, earned. Porter's eyes hardened. Corporal Emily Hayes, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star recipient, saved my life in Helmand Province. And you think you get to laugh. The cafe was silent. A fork clinked onto a plate somewhere in the back. Emily's lips trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Respect, gratitude. She turned toward Porter, their eyes locking in a quiet understanding forged years ago in the chaos of war. The two men muttered something and turned away, their laughter replaced by an awkward silence that filled the entire room. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning, because word about that cafe incident wouldn't stay inside those walls, and once it got out, things would escalate in a way none of them could have predicted. Asterisk if they thought that moment in the cafe was over, they hadn't counted on what happens when a Marine's honor is questioned. The air inside the cafe felt heavy after the confrontation. Emily tried to play it off, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened, but Porter knew better. Marines don't flinch in public, but that doesn't mean the hit doesn't land. Porter slid into the seat beside her, lowering his voice. "You okay, Corporal?" Emily forced a smile. Been through worse. But her grip on the coffee mug was tight enough to turn her knuckles white. The two men in the corner stayed quiet for a while, occasionally stealing glances. One of them, tall, with a scruffy beard, kept shifting in his seat, like he was debating whether to speak up again. Porter watched him closely, his years in uniform training him to spot trouble before it starts. The bearded man finally stood and tossed a crumpled bill onto his table. As he walked toward the door, he muttered, just loud enough for Emily to hear, "Doesn't change the fact it's just a tattoo." Porter rose instantly. "Say that again." The man turned, smirking. "You heard me, Colonel." Now the entire cafe was watching. Even the barista had stopped mid-pour, her eyes flicking between the two men like a spectator at a tennis match. Porter took a step forward, his voice low and precise. "That tattoo represents more sacrifice than you'll ever understand. And you think it's just ink. That's not ignorance, that's disrespect." The man shrugged. Freedom of speech. Emily set her coffee down, standing now. Her voice was steady, but her words cut like a blade. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. The man scoffed and walked out, the bell over the cafe door jingling as it swung shut. His friends scrambled to follow. But the real problem wasn't that they'd left. It was where they were headed. Porter had recognized them now. The taller one, Chris Larkin, had a reputation in town. He and his buddies were known for starting trouble, making loud comments in bars, and picking fights they thought they could win. He wasn't the kind of man to just let something go. An hour later, Porter and Emily left the cafe together, walking down Main Street toward the small Veterans Memorial Park. The November air had a bite to it, the trees bare and rattling in the wind. That's when they saw it. Spray paint, bright red, fresh, dripping down the granite monument where the names of local fallen Marines were engraved. Words scrawled across the stone in crude letters. Fake heroes. Emily froze. Her breath caught in her throat. That monument wasn't just stone. It was her friends, her brothers and sisters in arms. Porter's jaw clenched. "Larkin," he muttered, "has to be." Emily stepped forward, running her fingers over the vandalized names. Her voice shook. "They think this is funny." Porter looked around. Main Street was empty, but the paint was still wet. "We find them, and we make sure this doesn't just go away." This wasn't going to be a simple conversation anymore. This was personal, and in the Marine Corps. Personal means mission critical. Porter's mind was already running through options. Contact the sheriff. Handle it directly. He knew one thing for sure. This wouldn't end with an apology. Emily turned to him, her eyes burning with the same fire he'd seen back in Helmand. "Let's make it right." Porter nodded once. "Then we move fast." And with that, the hunt for Chris Larkin began. Asterisk when a Marine calls something a mission. It doesn't end until it's completed, and this mission had a target. Porter and Emily started with the local VFW hall. The veterans inside knew everyone in town, and word traveled faster than the wind in a place like this. "Yeah," one old Navy vet said, sipping his beer. "I saw Larkin and his buddy head toward the old mill after you left the cafe." The old mill was a crumbling building on the edge of town, abandoned for years. Teenagers used it for parties. Troublemakers used it for hiding. As they drove, Emily stared out the window, her mind flashing back to Afghanistan. The dusty roads, the tension in the air before a mission, the unspoken understanding between Marines that you always have each other's backs. They reached the mill, the winter sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the broken asphalt. Inside, voices echoed. Larkin and his friend were there, laughing, clinking beer bottles. Porter didn't storm in. He walked through the doorway slowly, letting his presence be known. Emily followed, her boots crunching on broken glass. Larkin looked up, smirking. "Colonel, Corporal, you here for round 2? Porter's voice was even. "You spray-painted the memorial," Larkin shrugged. "Can't prove it." Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp. "The paint's still on your hands." Larkin glanced down, his smirk faltering. Porter took another step closer. "You crossed the line, you don't. Come back from, you want to mock me, fine. But you dishonored them." He pointed toward the town center, where the memorial stood. "And that's something I won't let slide." Larkin laughed nervously. "What, you gonna hit me?" Porter leaned in, his voice low enough only Larkin could hear. "No, I'm going to make sure the whole town knows what you did." Emily pulled out her phone, snapping pictures of Larkin's hands, the open paint cans, and the half-empty beer bottles. "You can explain it to the sheriff," she said. But Porter had something better in mind than just a police report. Some people fear prison time, but for Larkin, the real punishment would be facing the entire town he thought he could disrespect. Porter didn't need to shout to make his point. Years of command had taught him that the quietest voice in the room can sometimes carry the most weight. Larkin sat slouched against the crumbling wall of the mill, glancing between Porter and Emily like a cornered animal. "You can't prove I wrote that," he repeated, but his voice had lost that. Cocky-edged. Emily tapped her phone screen. "Pictures of your hands, the paint cans, the beer bottles, all time-stamped. Oh, and we're in a building with a security camera outside. You walked right under it." That last detail made Larkin flinch, but Porter wasn't smiling. His plan wasn't about getting a quick confession. It was about making sure that anyone who even thought about disrespecting service members would remember this day. "Tomorrow's Veterans Day ceremony at the memorial," Porter said flatly. "You're going to be there. You're going to clean every inch of that monument before the crowd arrives. And then you're going to apologize publicly." Larkin blinked. "Not happening." Porter stepped closer, his shadow falling over him. "You think I'm asking?" The tension hung in the air. Larkin's friend shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should just do it," he muttered. Larkin shot him a glare, but even he could see this wasn't going his way. Emily crossed her arms. "Either you do it in front of the whole town, or you do it in front of the sheriff. Your choice." There was a long pause, then Larkin spat on the floor. "Fine, but I'm not wearing some stupid uniform or anything." Porter's eyes narrowed. "You'll wear a work shirt and gloves, and you'll listen when a Gold Star mother speaks." The next morning, Main Street buzzed with anticipation. Word of the cafe incident and the vandalism had spread fast. Small towns have their own version of social media, and it's called gossip. The Veterans Memorial gleamed in the cold morning light, except for one thing. The faint red stain of the spray paint that still clung to the cracks, and there, in front of the crowd, was Chris Larkin, scrubbing. Kneeling on the stone walkway, his hands raw from the brush, the gloves Porter had given him torn from the effort. Every so often, someone from the crowd would shout encouragement to the veterans nearby, or shake their head at Larkin in disgust. Porter stood nearby, his hands behind his back, watching with the same expression he'd worn during inspections. Back in the cause, Emily was beside him, her chin lifted high. When the work was finally done, Porter called Larkin to stand. "You've got something to say," Porter said. Larkin swallowed, the eyes of the crowd heavy on him. I was wrong. I disrespected people who served, and I shouldn't have." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't heartfelt. But that didn't matter. The point had been made. The public humiliation was complete, but Porter wasn't done yet. Sometimes the real victory isn't the apology. It's the way the story lives on long after the moment ends. After Larkin mumbled his apology, Porter stepped forward. "In this town, we honor those who served. We don't just stand by when someone crosses that line, and we certainly don't let it slide." The crowd applauded, the sound echoing down Main Street. A few veterans stepped forward, shaking Emily's hand and thanking her for her service. One older man removed his cap and nodded solemnly to Porter. Emily smiled faintly, the weight of the previous day finally lifting. "Feels good to see him have to face everyone," she murmured. Porter nodded. "Sometimes a battlefield's made of sand and stone. Sometimes it's made of concrete and gossip. Either way, you fight until it's over." As the crowd dispersed, Porter and Emily lingered near the memorial. The granite now gleamed in the sunlight, the red stain completely gone. A wreath lay at its base, the ribbon fluttering gently in the breeze. But just as they were about to leave, the mayor approached. "Colonel, Corporal, I heard what happened yesterday, and I want you both at the front of the parade this afternoon." Emily blinked. "The Veterans Day Parade," the mayor smiled. "You represent what this day's about. Service, honor, and standing up when it counts." Hours later, they rode side by side in the back of a vintage military jeep, the crowd lining the streets and waving flags. Emily wore her dress blues, the tattoo on her forearm clearly visible. Porter sat beside her in his own uniform, the sun catching the rows of medals on his chest. Somewhere in the crowd, Larkin stood watching. He didn't smirk this time. He didn't shout. He just stared, maybe realizing for the first time that respect isn't given, it's earned. As they passed the Veterans Memorial, Emily glanced at Porter. "You think he learned his lesson?" Porter's eyes didn't leave the crowd. "Doesn't matter. Everyone else did." The rest of the day was a blur of handshakes, thank yous, and stories swapped with other service members. But later that evening, Emily checked her phone and saw the first posts popping up, pictures from the cafe, from the cleaning, from the parade. The story was already spreading online, and that was the final victory, not just the public humiliation of one man, but a reminder to thousands more about what that eagle, globe, and anchor really means. She smiled to herself, leaning back in her chair. "Not bad for a coffee run," she said. Porter chuckled. "Not bad at all. How did you like this story? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories from Midsummer Myths.